Good morning, good afternoon, I've no idea, but whatever time you're watching this, but hello and welcome back to Dubious Engineering. Today, I have got Paul Parry with me from Bad Dog Designs. And Paul designs and makes Nixie Tube clocks. He's got some magnificent designs, some very interesting projects going on in his workshop. Paul, tell us a little something about Nixie tubes.
Morning, Howard. Well, Nixie tubes were the 1960s version of the LED. So before the LED was invented, a Nixie tube would have been used for any piece of equipment or electronics to display numbers. You used to see them in lifts, in petrol pumps, old pieces of scientific equipment. Even some old TVs used to have them to tell you what channel you were watching and things like that. As soon as the LED came along, they sort of went obsolete because the LED was much cheaper to make, used a lot less power. But there's nothing wrong with the tubes themselves as a display device. They just lost popularity, I suppose.
So I'm guessing they must act in a very similar way to the traditional sort of neon light, in the sense that you've got a gas that's inside of them, and you put a higher voltage through one of the anodes, and then you put a common voltage across a cathode, and that particular anode lights up. Is that fair?
Yeah, not far off. No, there's no heater in there, so it's not like a thermionic valve. It is purely just the ionisation of neon gas across an electrical conductor. There's a common anode though, and then each part you want to glow is the cathode. So there's a central grid at the front, which is the anode, and then each digit has its own connection to the base, and they're the cathode. And you need about 170 volts to make it glow.
Excellent. So effectively then, inside that little glass tube is a grid pattern made out of metal, and then you've got numbers from 0 to 9, all in a sequence effectively, so that when you put a voltage on each connector, each particular number glows.
That's correct, yes.
Fantastic.
And it's also done in such a way that the when you stack the numbers up on top of each other inside the tube, for legibility, they have to work out which order to put them in. So the 1 is usually always at the back.
Okay.
Things like 3 is at the front, so it doesn't mask off parts of the 7. And they took quite a few attempts to get the right sort of combination of layers, but they nailed it in the end.
Superb. And where are these things made?
They were made all over the place. Back in the 70s and the 80s, predominantly, I mean, like Mullard used to make them in the UK, and then Burroughs made them in the States. Gazatron and places like that made them in Russia and in Eastern Europe. Factories in China used to make them. They were made all over the world. They were a standard electronic component. And then, as I say, as the LED came on, they stopped manufacturing them. I think the last factory in Russia stopped producing them in 1991, and then that was it until probably about 5 years ago. A guy in the Czech Republic, Dalibor, he started making them himself. He actually started off in his shed and built the tube from scratch, and he's now successfully making very good high quality tubes. But they are, they're handmade pieces, so they're beautiful things, but it's not an automated process. And apart, I think there's 1 or 2 others now started making them, but there's no mass production at all. They're all individually handmade things.
So if you look at Nixie tubes, I believe they're sort of quite expensive, in the sense that they're quite complicated to make, and they're quite difficult to make, and then on top of that there's a bit of a supply and demand issue. Obviously there's not too many of them left in the world. So what about the drive electronics? Is that difficult to create?
The drive electronics are much easier to make than the tubes. I mean, there are dedicated chips specifically for driving Nixie tubes. There's a Russian driver chip, which is it's like a 7.4 series 7-segment display driver. It's a BCD decoder for 10 individual outputs, but it's got the high voltage transistors inside, which can sync the 170 volts without blowing up. So from that point of view, you have this driver chip which you just feed with 5-volt signals, and it does the rest for you.
Fantastic.
Or you can do it with discrete transistors, or you can get shift register ICs which will 64 outputs all at once.
So some of the designs that I've seen that you've put together, and actually you're very kindly going to send me across some of the pictures, so that we can include those into the video here. But some of the designs that I've seen that you've put together are sort of based on a steampunk sort of theme. Quite a lot of them use old school antique test equipment and instrumentation, just sort of keeping that sort of theme of the old school Nixie tube and Nixie clock system, in shape, I suppose. And also, I've seen you've also produced some sort of more modern looking designs as well. But so I know asking you to sort of pick your favourite design is a bit like asking you to choose your favourite child. But what is your favourite piece to work on? What is the one that sort of gives you the most satisfaction when you look at it and you've finished?
I really like the little, I call them like Pandora clocks, and they start off as they're like old Victorian jewellery boxes, and they're all beautifully made from rosewood and mother of pearl, and you can add so much detail to them. And I never make two the same. They'll all have a 4-tube or a 6-tube set of clock electronics, but it's the extra things you can put in there. You can put Decatron tubes in there. You can put little panel meters which move and show the seconds, and then all the detailed brass designs. I have great fun in creating these clocks, because you just don't know how it's going to end up, and it's just they're beautiful things to work with. They made things very, very well back in the day. I hate really anything to use plastic, but people like plastic clocks, but I personally prefer all the wood and the brass ones. So you have to sort of cater for both needs, but I much prefer working with old upcycled pieces of equipment and old antiques.
Do you do all your own woodwork and metalwork as well?
Oh yeah, I've got a workshop out the back. Any old like sewing boxes or jewelry boxes, I'll completely sand them back to the bare wood. I'll re-lacquer them, polish them, I drill them. It's all done in house. The only thing I have done out is the engraving. A lot of the designs have got this intricate, delicate. We'll use that word you said. They've got delicate brass engraved done. So I draw all that up on the computer and I send it to my friend Andy, and he's got some very nice CNC engraving machines which cut it all out for me. That's the only thing I don't really do here. Everything else is done in the workshop.
That's fantastic. There's an awful lot of hard work that goes into your designs. I can see that, because the detail and the quality of the finish is just absolutely magnificent. So, do you sell self-build kits?
No, we don't sell self-build kits as such. The reason being is, there's some very, very good kits out there. My friend Pete, for instance, at PV Electronics, he makes brilliant kits. A lot of my clocks are also based on his designs, and he's geared up to deal with. He's got it down to a fine art of packing all the right components in the bags. He's got all the instructions you can need, and then if you have a problem, you can give him a ring and he'll help you out. I'm not geared up for doing that. So we don't send out any kits at all. But what we do, you can come to the workshop here and build a clock, and then if you run into any problems, I'm at hand to help you put it right. So if you put a diode in backwards and it's gone bang or something, we can fix it here and there. There's nothing more frustrating than having a kit at home and you build it and it doesn't work, and it's like, oh, what do I do now? Or if you've damaged the component or put something in backwards, then realise that you've broken it, you then have to wait for someone to come and help you for another part to arrive. So here, I mean, I guarantee you will leave with a fully working clock, which I'm happy to guarantee for you.
I think that's probably a very good idea, because I think some people will look at what you've got and think, wow, yeah, okay, and they'll bite off a little bit too much more than they can chew. And perhaps their soldering skills aren't up to scratch as well. You know, maybe it's been a while since they've done any soldering. So I agree with you. I think that's a really good idea. So people can visit you, and you can give them a little bit of guidance as the day goes by, and they build their own clock effectively. I think that's a really, really good thing. So
we have an endless supply of tea and biscuits as well. So, you know, can't be that.
Superb. So what other things do you guys sell there at Bad Dog Designs?
We do all kinds of things, really. I mean, obviously, primarily it's clocks, either, you know, like the repeatable, more modern designs, or it's the like the steampunk stuff, which I've turned old pieces of equipment into. But we also have this massive section on the website where you can choose any old piece of equipment I've got listed, and I'll make that specifically into a clock for the person who chooses it. I mean, it's like a museum of electronic equipment from the last 50 years. You can just go through and say, oh, I quite like item number 75. What can you do with that? So there's all that side of it as well.
So people can commission a piece through you effectively.
Yeah,
and
people send in something that they want me to convert.
Like I've got an old Avo 8 downstairs, which could quite happily do with having a few Nixie tubes put in it.
We've done quite a few Avo 8s, to be fair. Yes, they convert pretty well. But I mean, just shelf behind me, there's a mantle clock which a lady sent in for me to convert. That's a pigeon racing clock on the shelf above it. And then we've got like a post-apocalyptic Cold War tape recorder. There's a film prop I'm doing. There's some Geiger counters there. There's a cash register. There's all kinds of stuff. It changes week to week what's on the shelves. As stuff gets built, it goes in and out. But apart from the clocks, I mean, I've got these little things called neon dudes, and they're literally just little electronic freeform sculptures. So if you've got any ICs left over or resistors, I just stick them together to make these little figures, and they go in a little glass dome, and it's just a display piece. But I have made so many of these things, and people come in with requests. Oh, can you make one playing ice hockey? Can you make one operating a mixing desk? Can you do a DJ? Can you do a left-handed bass guitarist? And the list just goes on and on. And it's lovely to see what people ask you to make. And that's great fun. And again, it's also just reusing old bits. It's just a way of being creative with small electronic components, and they've really took off. You know, it started off. I was bored one day, and I had a couple of ICs, and I just made a little sculpture of myself and the wife walking the dog, and I just put it on Twitter, and it just went absolutely crazy. So I thought, right, okay, there might be something. So we do them as well.
There's the website, which is baddogdesigns.co.uk, and also Paul is quite active on Twitter as well. So I'm sure you'll find Bad Dog Designs on Twitter. I think it's at Bad Dog Designs. Now, what's behind you, Paul? There's it looks like an organ. It looks like a type because the resolution of the Skype call that we've got here is a little bit, just a little bit sort of shy of being good quality. So what is that thing that's behind you, mate?
I mean, there's a couple of things behind me. I mean, it's, well, you can see it's called the Symphony, and I was asked to create a clock for somebody's office, and they wanted a dual time. So there's a time for London, and there's a time for Scotland.
So there's two sets of Nixie tubes in there, then.
Yeah,
okay.
There's two nice clocks, and then what it does, there's a row of copper pipes which have been cut to specific lengths, and some little hammers, and it's programmed to play tunes. I haven't actually got it running at the moment, but you can hear. Don't know if that came across.
Yeah, we heard that. Yeah, fantastic, good.
Yeah. There's a little box which goes with it. There we go. There. Right, that's the control box for it, and There's a little SD card which has the tune recorded as a MIDI file that goes in the top, and then it plugs into the back, and you can select which song you want, and you hit the play, and it plays it.
That's magnificent, magnificent. And then to the other side of that, you've got something that looks a little bit like an old school sort of Moog synthesizer with a whole load of knobs and dials on it. What's that bad boy then? Oh crikey, it's lighting up.
Yeah. That is a how do we begin with this? That is a programming device for a Turing machine. So I was asked to make one of the things I made a long time ago was a replica of the Turing bomb at Bletchley Park, which decoded the German Enigma machine messages. And the guy who asked me to make that was a big fan of Alan Turing, and he says, "Okay, thank you for that. Can you now make a Turing machine?" So the Turing machine is a hypothetical computer, and it's in two parts. So this is the programming device, and you use these switches here to set all the initial ones and zeros, and then you actually enter the program code on these switches here. It's programmed in a language called BF, which is short for brain f***. Seriously, look it up on Wikipedia, and you have eight programmed commands in the language. Yeah, it's only got 8, and you set your program, and then you set your initial states. You hit the button to compile it, and then the machine in the other room will then execute it, and it will work out the computation for you. I haven't got that part running yet; it's still work in progress. But the guy is also a big fan of Moog synthesizers, so I actually modelled it on the Moog one.
Fantastic, mate. It looks absolutely gorgeous. The effort and the time that must have gone into building that, putting all of those switches in place and designing it is just mind-boggling. That must have taken many, many hours or days of work.
I started this Turing Machine project back in February. So this is all based on the Arduino platform.
We're talking 9 months, 10 months down the road now then.
Oh yeah, and the other part of it, the machine which does the computations. I mean, I'll send you some pictures. That's like 1.5 meters across.
Oh my goodness!
And it's an array of 32 NIXIE tubes, each with their own little processor and a head which moves backwards and forwards. It's a big machine.
My goodness. Now I understand that you've been commissioned by a few famous people to make some clocks as well. So who have you had in the shop?
You never know what you're going to get on your emails, and you never know who's going to call you. But I've always been a big fan of Twitter, and on Twitter, one of the dragons, the Epithetus, is very active, and he supports small businesses like myself. And he has this thing on a Sunday evening called the Small Business Sunday. And all you have to do is tweet to Theo a picture of what you do and a brief description. And thousands of businesses do this. And he picks 5 businesses every week. And then he'll retweet them on his Twitter feed. And then you become members of his Small Business Sunday Club. When you say a club, I mean, he hires out the ICC at Birmingham every year and hosts an event. It's at networking. It's really, really good. And one of the opportunities which came from that, there was 12 exhibition stands available at the autumn fair at the NEC, and he basically said, "All right then, you guys, give me pictures of your most innovative and unusual products." So of course I sent him pictures of NIXIE Clocks, and I won a free stand at the autumn fair. So we went along, we set up the stand. It was absolutely brilliant. And then Theo actually came round to the stand, and he was on the stand for like 20 minutes. And it turns out he's a geek like the rest of us. He loves his watches, he loves clocks, things which glow. And he said to me, he says, "I'm going to have one of these." And that was a couple of years ago. And then his retail group contacted me, and they said, it's Theo's 60th birthday coming up soon. How about making him a clock for his 60th birthday? So I did, and I made this massive steampunk monster. It got a smoking chimney, a little engine on the front, and it got all his brands engraved on the front. So it got like Robert Dias, and it got Ryman's and Bow Avenue and London Graphic, and he knew nothing about this, and it was he was hosting the AGM for all his retail group, and they presented it to him live on stage, and he hadn't got a clue what was going on. It was brilliant. We were there as well. We were sort of backstage watching, and then he came in and we had a chat with him for half an hour talking about the clock, and yeah, it's really, really good.
Fantastic. And you mentioned earlier that Stephen Fry's partner.
Yeah, Elliot. I was contacted by Elliot's parents, and they said, "Can you make a clock for Stephen Fry's husband for his 30th?" And I said, "Yeah, we can do that." And we made this massive. I called it the Gurdy Hurdy. It got organ pipes on it and a set of bellows, and on the hour it just tooted this thing, and we installed it at Stephen's flat in London. It was quite a surreal experience, to be honest.
That's fantastic.
You just never know. Marco Pierre White's got one at one of his restaurants in I think it's in Bath. We also had the director of the Bank of America, made a clock for him. I said it's just every day is a different day. You just don't know who's going to ring you up, who's going to drop you an email or get asked. It's I love the not knowing what's happening, sort of, from that point of view.
That's absolutely superb. Well, Paul, thank you ever so much for taking time out with us today to give us a little bit of a guided tour. I hope at some point in the future, Paul's workshop, by the way, is up in Staffordshire area, and I hope at some point in the future that I can get an opportunity to come up with a couple of cameras and get my camera lady working for us, and perhaps we can take a look around the workshop in a little bit more detail. And
welcome.
Thank you very much. That would be fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Paul Parry from Bad Dog Designs. One last question, Paul, and I forgot completely to ask you. How did you come up with the name Bad Dog Designs?
That's golden retriever, Max. When we first started the company, we were trying to think, what the hell do we call it? And we were taking the dog for a walk up the local woods, and he disappeared off. And being a retriever, he's like he can divine water. He can find a puddle anywhere, and he just came back, filthy, covered in mud, with this like stupid grin on his face. We said, "You bad dog," and it just sort of went from there. Really, we said, "Yeah, that will do. That's what we're going to use."
Fantastic. Excellent. Paul, thanks ever so much for taking time out with us today. Again, if you guys would like to find Paul's website, it's baddogdesigns.co.uk, and Paul is also available at Bad Dog Designs on Twitter. Thanks, Paul. Take care. Thanks ever so much for spending time with us today. It's lovely to see some magnificent equipment there. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Alex.
Cheers for now. Bye-bye.
Cheers.